Well, hi, everybody. Happy holidays. Thanks for starting your weekend with us here at Bookish. We're your virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life produced by the Southern California News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor of premium content here, and I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers for supporting our programs throughout this year. We're so grateful to you. And hey, if you are a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate from our partner, Once Upon a Time Bookstore in Montrose. And hey, if you're not a subscriber yet, well, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe and find your local paper. That way you're going to know all of the great things we've got going on. And also, if you've missed our past programs, shame on you. Go to scng.com/virtual programs and check them all out. Anyway, before we get started, I want to remind you of a few things. You audience members are muted, but if you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar there at the end of your screen. And if you want to add a comment or talk to other people, use the chat feature also found on your screen. Our SCNG Books editor, Eric Peterson, is behind the scenes to help answer your questions. And don't worry about missing a thing, because a video link will be sent to you after the show so you can revisit some of your favorite moments, or hey, share it with friends. It's also posted, as I mentioned, at scng.com/virtual events. And that's where you're going to be able to find all of our past virtual shows, as well as see what's coming up. Anyway, now joining us from her bohemian splendor in Pasadena is our beloved host. You've heard her as a regular commentator on NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life and Marketplace. She also produces the syndicated Radio Minute, The Lowdown on Science. And wait, there's more. She's a contributor at The Atlantic and author of 7 books, including her most recent, The Mad Woman and the Roomba. Welcome, my friend, Sandra Singlo. Hello, dear.
Hello and happy holidays. I come to you from my strangely gothically lit home. I never know what time it is with daylight savings, but I put this reindeer blanket from Big Lots on so I can do sort of isn't that a festive holiday moment?
So festive. I have my elf hat on because I'm desperately trying to get all of my Christmas shopping done. And just so you know, I had an idea from our last program. We were talking about the Amy Tan lecture at the Segerstrom Center for the Arts on I think January 23rd. Well, all of my book nerd friends are going to get tickets to see Amy Tan. So if you're one of my friends, act surprised when you open the envelope, because that's what you're getting anyway.
And I have to say, as an Asian American female writer, not to put myself in a box, but I'm particularly excited about Amy Tan's coming, because she's been writing for so long, as you know.
Oh my gosh, she's been producing literary works for decades. Really important.
And just to back up for a moment, my children, ages 21 and 22, first and middle names are Tsing and Peng. They're actually 1/4 Chinese. My elder daughter is actually blonde. And recently she told me her favorite movie of all time was Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Oh, I love that movie. Michelle Yeoh, she's so amazing.
No, exactly. And my daughter said it's because it's the first movie I've ever seen where it stars someone who looks like you, my mother. Okay, not Michelle Yeoh in her fantastic fight scenes, more like in the laundromat in her Walter Mitty, the tennis shoes, the sweatpants, Yeah.
That's definitely more your speed rather than
literally my speed. And we all loved Crazy Rich Asians, as you did.
Oh my, I've seen that movie 5 times with my son. It's our favorite rom-com. I love that show.
I love it. If you're not rich and you're not Asian, maybe you could arguably be crazy. I don't know. I'm going to ask your family. But I told them, but 30 years ago already, there was a film starring Asian American actresses, phenomenal, a hit called The Joy Luck Club, based on Amy Tan's amazing novel. And here today as a special holiday gift for our viewers, we have a surprise guest opening for us today.
Yes, we do. Hopefully she will hear us. Hello, yes. Special guest.
Well, as she's going on, she is the amazing. There she is, Lauren. Oh my goodness. Okay, so Lauren, you're joining us from Cabo. You got on the. We're so grateful to you. I mean, you've had such an amazing cultural range of careers. You starred as Connie on Broadway in A Chorus Line, and then Yes, and Samantha, you like the Bad Santa reference.
And the Bad Santa, which is the most inappropriate holiday movie of all time and much beloved in our house.
Yes, and also you rocked the world of Friends by appearing as Ross's girlfriend. So scandal.
Hey, you guys are making me feel awfully good, I have to say. And like, just it's so wild to me that two of my favorite people know each other, work together, love each other. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to our history in a moment. But of course, you know, your role in the Joy Luck Club was so just iconic. It was a huge moment. And I wondered, this is the ultimate softball question, but I mean, it's kind of like, how radical was it to be in a movie like that with all Asian American actors? And can you tell us a little bit of the story of how you got cast in your role in it?
It was just one of those little gifts that dropped into my lap from, you know, above. And you know, because we all knew, you know, how special Amy's book was, that millions of people had read it, that we were representing, and it was like the first time and all of that, and like, no pressure. And my girlfriend was like, hey, there's this book I love, you know, you really should try to be in it. And I'm like, okay, yeah. Like, meanwhile, there's thousands of people auditioning. But I was trying to tell my son, who unfortunately wants to be an actor, that you have to kind of like, you know, study your craft, but there's just a good amount of dumb luck involved also. And I just happened to, like, Wayne Wang thought I happened to look a little like France Nguyen. Like, we have a similar nose. Like, we both have like tiny faces, right? So that worked in my favor. And it's, you know, I try to remind myself for the times when it doesn't work in my favor, when I look nothing like the, you know, the person I'm supposed to look like. And so, you know, in that particular case, I just was at the right time at the right place, and I didn't suck enough to get the part. So
so humble, didn't suck. And do you remember, I mean, what it felt like when the movie came out? I mean, it was a huge sensation, like what it was like either promoting the movie or talking to fans.
it was so exciting, I have to say. And I do recall, though, that we did a Q&A, and it was like, you know, actors and writers and creative people, we're all pretty sensitive, right? And there was a good point made by the Asian men in the audience that they didn't feel that Asian men were portrayed in a very nice way. And so they wanted to know why all the Asian men were portrayed as such jerks. And Wayne Wang said, because Asian men are jerks. He just like doubled down, and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just said that. And so, you know, and then Amy piped in like, hang on, wait, let's back up a second. This is just my experience, okay? These stories are cobbled together from like a conglomerate of people I know. So it's not that this is the truth. The point is that Asian people out there need to write their own stories, so there are more and more Asian stories represented out there. So please have at it. And so that was a great message.
Well, and that is a perfect segue, if I may, because I am a fan of yours. I have known you and your work since the 90s, and you yourself are a fantastic writer, aside from being a well-known performer. And I remember, and Samantha, I don't know if you, this goes back to our history, at the HBO Workspace was the first time that I saw you do your solo show, 25 Psychics. Solo. Can you talk about how that show came about and the development of it? Because it's such a uniquely Lauren story.
Well, you know, my manager at the time, like, we just raved. We just, like, you were like, oh, you know, so we were trying to get you to write it for me, to write my show for me. You write it and I'll perform it. That was the idea, right? And then when that didn't work out, HBO paid me $500, and I had to freaking write the thing myself. Thanks a lot, Sandra. But
I don't even remember being asked. So you should check with your manager if it was done. Yeah.
No, we tried so hard. But I think that it felt a little weird to you to be writing your material and not performing it, because you're a performer too. So we totally understood that, you know. And so my manager said it was like panning for gold, where he would just like tell me to write, and he'd pick out the one sentence that was okay. And then we kind of went from there, because that was the first time I'd ever written. So it was really scary, but it was great. It was like cathartic, and the fun thing too is that, my son who wants to be an actor now, he's at Wesleyan and he just performed an excerpt of 25 Psychics in his class. So he played me and my mom and my grandma.
Your grandma Helen, right? I mean, that was
Yes.
what a character. And I think
It was a
that I
character.
remember not just the psychic. So it's not just the straightforward, I am an Asian American story, whatever we thought that was at the time. It's such a colorful and interesting tale. And I think also, didn't you grow up in Chicago
I
amongst?
grew up in Highland Park, Illinois. Yeah.
Yes.
It was an all Jewish neighborhood. And so the show is actually about my grandmother's journey from China to the United States. And she really was such a character, 4'10", like ball of energy. And it was kind of like me trying to find my sense of enlightenment. And then of course it ends up being in your backyard. Like, so my grandma ends up teaching me a lot. But I still remember a line from my show that you liked, because after you saw my show, you came backstage and you said, "Oh my gosh, that line about," see, because my grandma had nicknames for everybody, for all her children. And my uncle, her eldest child, was called Yitgin, which means one crazy vein, because she thought his blood just, went out nowhere, like just out of his body into nowhere. So that's what his name was. Anyway, you like that line.
It was hilarious, right? And her accent and the code, it was a great, it was a great personification and character. And I think you've done so much amazing voiceover work as well. The way that you slip, even though you are Asian American, I think we're going to continue talking about this next month when we have Catherine Ma on as well, of like, it's many different ethnicities. You can do this amazing Jewish accent, like you can do so many different types of characters that you kind of are a chameleon that can do so many beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's the beauty of voice acting, because it's not so stereotyping. You could be anything really.
Yeah. And Samantha, also you have history with like I don't want to,
I was just going to say, when she was very humbly talking about her writing, I had the experience of seeing some of her writing, and Lauren, I still want you to write that book. So do it.
I'm sorry to repeat this again, but honestly, my writing would suck without the editing of Samantha Dunn. Like, I took my first writing class with Sam at UCLA. It was like an extension class, and it was just so much joy. And then we roped her into doing a writer's group with us once a month, right? And that went on for a while. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yes, and you tried to find me a husband. I'm eternally grateful. It didn't work out, but I did find one ultimately. Thank you.
I remember that, the whole Carlos Gomez chapter. Yeah. You wrote it
out of it, so thank you.
Yes, you did.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for hopping on. It's so great to see you. As you say, Asian Don't Raisin, and the 30th anniversary of the Joy Luck Club, Amy Chan's phenomenal book. You're the huge part of that, and we hope to see more of you and your writing as we can move forward in 2023.
Thank you for having me, and happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays, Lauren.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to let you get to it, because I know we've got lots of really great stuff coming up.
We totally do. And I'm going to take off my 2 holiday thing as we go into the land of cold case murders next. I'm
going to leave my elf ears on. Goodbye.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have the amazing Edward Humes is on live today. The 30-second download. Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Edward Humes has written 16 narrative nonfiction books, ranging from the true crime bestseller Mississippi Mud to the critically acclaimed Enviro Chronicle, Garbology, or Dirty Love Affair with Trash, to the PEN Award-winning No Matter How Loud I Shout, a narrative account of life and death inside the Los Angeles Juvenile Court. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Reader's Digest, Oxford American, Glamour, and Sierra. Hume's books rely on narrative storytelling and immersion journalism, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, to bring the feel and style of a novel to nonfiction. His mesmerizing new book is For the Forever Witness, How DNA and Genealogy Solved a Cold Case Double Murder. Welcome, Edward.
There I am. Hey.
There you are. Hey, oh my gosh, thanks so much for hopping on. I did have to take off my holiday wear to discuss your amazing book because it's grim, but fascinating and mesmerizing. And I read it in one sitting. So I guess for our viewers, could you just set up a little bit of the story of this book, kind of its milieu and how you came to this story?
Yeah, sure. Well, the story begins with the murder of a young couple on a road trip to Seattle in November 1987. And then the case seemed unsolvable for more than 30 years, no matter how hard they tried to try and find a solution. And then a new way of IDing suspects came along, and it developed not from the cops or the crime labs, but from genealogy enthusiasts, who took their hobby beyond finding long lost relatives to hunting down killers. And they did that by leveraging the power of these home DNA tests that millions of us have taken to learn more about our roots, never suspecting that we were secretly crowdsourcing murder investigations with every tube of spit we sent into Ancestry or 23andMe. And then, of course, that leads to the third part of the story, the whole privacy question of what that entails. So,
it's so fascinating the way that you break down the way you investigate and story, how crime analysis works, and also the DNA part. So, I think, for instance, for our viewers, I think even the phrase, cold case, can you break down cold case a little bit, what it used to mean and what it means now after your book?
Yeah, well, cold cases it's actually a great description of it, because when a murder, for instance, occurs, as in this one, the deaths of a young couple, Tanya Van Kylenborg and Jay Cook. She was 18, he was 20. They were from Vancouver Island, Canada, which is an amazing place, and they were driving down to run an errand in Seattle, about a 5-hour trip. They were going to spend the night and then go back home. They just disappeared, and a week later their bodies are found. It was an international sensation. There was huge coverage. It was one of the Pacific Northwest's biggest cases at the time, and it became the most enduring mystery because after 2 years of it being a hot case of having teams of investigators working on, gradually the lack of any return on that investment, the investigation slows, it goes to the back burner, it gets taken off the burner, and it literally becomes a cold case that is looked at every year or so just to see if there's anything new, or there's a new development, a new kind of DNA test is available, and so they'll resurrect the evidence and see if there's a new lead. Time and again, they'd try new things and it would fail until the original detective on the case in 1987 became the sheriff of Snohomish County, Washington, where the case was in part set. And he creates a cold case division. And the detective who was the first and lead detective, asked to breathe new life into these old cases, was a guy named Jim Sharp. And the first case he looked at out of like 65 that he had was Jay and Tanya's case, because that seemed like it had the most possibilities.
And it's so fascinating for people who are followers of true crime or new to it, because the techniques they use, there is a van that they drove in that she is found, unfortunately, basically raped and murdered, and her boyfriend is out in the woods. There's one palm print they can't identify because there isn't a database. And then I just didn't know this thing about playing cards. Can you, for those new to, can you just explain the playing card technique and what that's about?
Well, this was something that Detective Scharf heard about, that the Defense Department did. They give out these cards in Iraq, these decks of playing cards. Instead of the normal aces and kings and queens, there'd be suspects they wanted to get, terrorism suspects, and they give out these cards, and there'd be contact information and a little bit of and a photo of the man they were hunting, and a call for information. And he thinks, wow, I could do something like that. And he found somebody to fund getting 5,000 decks of cold case cards made. and gave them out to jails and prisons where, well, criminals are located who may know something about the case and would have a little more to do than play cards and things like that to pass the time. And sure enough, a lot of tips came in. He solved multiple cases through these cold case cards. Unfortunately, not Jay's and Tanya's case, although tips did come in, they didn't pan out. It was a really cool and different way to try and breathe new life into this cold case. And, one of the reasons I love this story was that it's set in two times. It's set into the world of today, but also the world of 1987. And to some of us, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it was a pre-cell phone age. The only streaming going on was something you'd have to cross over so you didn't get your feet wet. I mean, there was no pervasive video surveillance cams or facial recognition. All the tools that really have diminished privacy, but also enabled the police to hunt down killers didn't exist. They had that palm print you mentioned and a little bit of DNA, and it didn't leave them anywhere.
Right, and no cell phone tower records, et cetera. And I wonder, since we're going back to 1987, as you talk about like the three phases of DNA fingerprinting, and just to give us a sense of how that's changed since 1987 to today. And it's really quite fascinating. And I wonder if you can just mention the alpha beta baby somewhere in here.
Oh yeah. Okay, baby alpha beta, my favorite story.
Baby alpha beta, it's the story is unbelievable. It's kind of like if you wrote it as fiction, they would say it's too fanciful, but it's real. But I'm sorry, back to you.
So yeah, DNA. And it was a development in how we deal with DNA that finally led to this case and the Golden State Killer case being solved and hundreds of other cold cases. But going back to the first age of DNA, that first big breakthrough, and Joseph Wambaugh wrote a wonderful book about it called The Blooding. And this was the discovery of these little parts of our DNA molecule that don't code for the color eyes we have or our hair. They're just kind of like little dividers that separate the coding parts. Think of them like there's dividers in file drawers that separate the good, different sets of information. And each person has little patterns in these dividers that are unique to them. It's literally a fingerprint inside your cells. And the scientist who figured that out was knighted for it in Great Britain, and it became a new way of identifying suspects. But you still had to find the suspect first and then compare their DNA to the crime scene DNA, just like a fingerprint, and that would sort of confirm you had the right guy. Fast forward another 10 years, we have the second age of DNA. The FBI starts this program where not just fingerprinting suspects, but we're taking the DNA fingerprints of suspects and putting them in a database after they get arrested or convicted, depending on the state. And now you had a search engine for crime that would search through DNA fingerprints, these little discrete parts of the cells. And its power was you could identify the one person in the world that would match your suspect. Its blind spot was somebody had to get caught for something first in order to get in that database. If you never got caught, or if you just did one terrible crime, you were invisible to the system. They couldn't catch you this way. And that brings us to the third age. And this is what's so cool about it. This genetic genealogy, it's not an exclusion tool where you just zero in the one person in the world who matches. It's the tool of inclusion. It has everybody a criminal suspect is related to. He doesn't have to have his DNA, or she doesn't have to have her DNA in the database to be found. If you know how to leverage all that data from us, looking for our great grandparents and our ancestors' origins, all that DNA also helps you build the family tree of a suspect and work it backwards until you zero in on the person who thinks they're, scot-free and will never be caught. It's just changed everything.
Yeah, and it's mind-blowing. And I won't give away exactly how it goes in the book, but the way that you can go through family trees and then from fourth cousins, third and find where they cross and who. I mean, and coupled with public records. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Baby alpha beta. We forgot about baby alpha beta.
Yes. So
real quick, baby alpha beta was a newborn whose mother was in great distress. She gave birth by herself in the car and knew she couldn't take care of this baby, so she abandoned him, a couple not that far from Disneyland, at a supermarket called Alpha Beta. It's now an extinct chain. And the staff found her around back in a milk crate by the dumpsters on a cold winter day and rescued her. And nobody knew where she came from or how she got there or who she was related to. And she became an adopted child. And years later, she decides she wants to find out her roots as an adult. Like, why was I abandoned? Who was I related to? Why am I so different than my, and how I view the world and the people who raised me? And she finds this woman, C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogist who has been helping adoptees and amnesiacs and other people find their identities through this new kind of DNA. And she finds baby Alpha Beta's birth family, brothers, sisters, mother, and for the, she says that for the first time in her life, she made sense to herself because she saw all her sort of nature and qualities in this family she never knew she had. But the technique that this was actually the first time a crime was solved, the crime of child endangerment. Even though that wasn't the purpose of the investigation, it was the first time a crime was solved with this new technique, way before any of these other criminal cases that your listeners may have read about. And the eerie part of this, baby Alpha Beta was born and abandoned on the same day that the victim in my case, Tanya Van Cuylenborg, was killed. So the very tool, as she was leaving the world, the child who came into the world, whose case would perfect the tools needed to solve that case, was appearing on the scene.
And it's so it's very emotional, and that's why the book is just rocks one on so many levels. It's very emotional, and that coincidence is amazing. I think if you could just mention one more thing that blew my mind reading this, and there's so many more things, so people have to get the book, but one more tidbit is the snapshot technique by Parabon. And those images were, I felt so chilled. So can you explain that phenomenon?
Oh yeah. That's so real quickly. This company Parabon Nanolabs has been very active in developing profiles through this kind of DNA that we measure our ancestry with, and that's who C.C. Moore works for right now, or works with on her genetic genealogy. But they do a parallel thing where they can generate basically a mugshot from somebody's DNA and figure out based upon the patterns that they see in the DNA, what color eyes they have, how big their noses are, what their ethnic origins are, and can paint a portrait that sometimes has been so eerily accurate that the suspects have actually given themselves up when these DNA mugshots are circulated. They say, "You got me, Cuppers."
Right, just a swipe of your fluid somewhere on a door handle, they take it and can generate your that is like voodoo, futuristic.
Scary, fascinating, and sobering, because the power of the capability now that science is finding to find out about us through our DNA raises all kinds of questions, and we haven't really answered those yet.
Yeah, the slippery slope that all of our privacy, you just go in a coffee cup, throw it in the trash, and people, and I think that your book really explains that very well as well.
The Pandora's box syndrome, for sure.
So, and I think that you have such a legacy of investigative journalism, and I just, my last question to you is, how does it mean that sometimes your books can change lives? I think the burning, was it burning where actually a woman got released from prison can you explain a little bit about that, and then about what responsibility is for you if your books come out?
Yeah, that was my last book, Burned, and it was also sort of about forensics, but in this case, a forensic fail. If Forever Witness is about a forensic success, this was an arson investigation that went off the rails, and a woman in Los Angeles. The fire was actually not that far in time from the Forever Witness murders. It was in 1989 in Los Angeles County, and a woman who was convicted of setting fire to her house on purpose and killing her 3 young children inside. And many years later, the California Innocence Project dug into the case, and I also looked at it. And although she didn't prevail in court trying to overturn her conviction, the governor heard about her case and had people reading the book and looking at the evidence that the Innocence Project generated, and commuted her sentence. So she was instantly released, and in part because of her stellar record of behavior in prison, but in part because of the new questions about her conviction. So, and she's doing great. She's living in Washington State and leading a productive life.
That's so inspiring. And I lied. One final last quick question from our viewer, Jim Weaver. Other than you, who is your favorite mystery or thriller writer?
My favorite mystery or thriller writer? Ooh, that's really hard, because I read so many. I'll tell you some books that I've read recently that I really liked. Deborah Blum's Poisoner's Handbook, which is set in the Jazz Age, New York. It's a wonderful book about basically the development of the first scientific testimony used in court, as opposed to just bogus information that was used to convict people. And it's wonderfully atmospheric. Really enjoyed that. And then some of the classic works of true crime that have become great literature: The Executioner's Song, Norman Mailer, or Truman Capote in Cold Blood. I mean, those are the kind of set the bar.
Yeah, and yes, and your work is nonfiction, narrative nonfiction is up there with all of the other books, and this is a fantastic book. So thank you so much for being on. Edward Hume's, his amazing new book is The Forever Witness. You will read it in one sitting. You'll be talking about it constantly, and it's really, congratulations. It's really fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sandra.
Yes, a pleasure. Okay, finally, thank you. And we have one final guest today. And I just want to note in the chat, we're always happy to see you in the chat. Herbert Huang, for instance, is using an app to record meetings and take notes with AI. So if you want to hop on the chat and see what Herbert is using to record this and take notes, especially if you're a student or a college student or high school, do that as well. Last but not least, we have Tess Gunty, and here's the 30-second download. Let's put it this way. 30-year-old Tess Gunty's debut novel, The Rabbit Hutch, which follows a week in the lives of residents of low-income housing in Indiana, whose action centers around a mysterious act of violence, is the breakout debut novel of the year. The Rabbit Hutch won this year's National Book Award for Fiction, the inaugural Waterstone's Debut Fiction Prize, the Barnes & Noble Discover Prize. Publishers Weekly called it one of the 10 best books of 2022. Born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, she's a graduate of University of Notre Dame with an MFA in writing from NYU. We just say that because she's so young, and her mentors are really like Rick Moody, really fantastic, and also had their imprint on this book that she credits. So we spoke to Tess earlier this week, so we can just roll tape. Yes, welcome to Bookish. We're so happy to have you and honored.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I mean, the Rabbit Hutch is so decorated by now. We've just mentioned all the awards it's won, and just sweeping many book awards. But I think that when you first finished it, after writing it for 5 years, you didn't know it was going to sweep all these awards. In fact, you didn't even send it out, did you, originally?
That's right. Yeah, I decided to print it out and bind it at FedEx and then put it on my shelf and move on.
Because why? Because the conventional wisdom from publishing was what?
Well, I think I had heard from a few people that I really trusted that publishing was risk averse, and that, especially for literary fiction, which of course is a risky business inherently, it's yeah, it's just that your first novel can't be too strange. If it's too peculiar, then there's not going to be a market. And so the advice was to, maybe save this for a future publication, but you can't possibly. And it wasn't advice that was given to me like in response to this novel. It was in response to other things I'd been writing. But yeah, I guess I had just been so, I had received that kind of advice, and then I had also just internalized a lot of rejections up until then. So I thought, there's no way, no one's going to want to read this. It's too peculiar.
Yeah, and no, it's so inspiring for people to hear that story and the start of it, because it can feel like such a done deal. Okay, so to dig into the book, and it's a fantastic read, and it is somewhat, formally experimental in a certain way, but it's a fast read and easy to follow, and it's been described as a work of polyphonic fiction. So for viewers unfamiliar with this term, can you define the term and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, it's used differently, and I think in different academic contexts, it probably could be taken apart. But the way I use it is just to describe any novel that is very much a novel, not a short story collection, but is united by several different storylines and voices rather than just one.
And yeah, and I think that you've said then the main character then may be maybe not even a person, although it has a distinctive, amazing protagonist, but a town, right?
Mhm. Right. I mean, I was just learning from books like Middlemarch, other polyphonic works, even Ulysses, and some contemporary influences, Great House by Nicole Krauss and N.W. by Zadie Smith. And a lot of these books, their main character is an idea or an object or a place. And in this case, I knew I wanted to really write about this place. It was a fictional city, but it's kind of an ode to this entire region of America. And so I thought this forum, this multi-voiced forum, will allow me to explore this town with a little bit more flexibility and complexity. And yeah.
Yeah, and can you describe the town? And of course, it's based on the hometown that you grew up on also, right?
Yeah, so the town is called Vacaville, Indiana, and I grew up in South Bend, Indiana. So it shares a lot of things. I mean, little details from the fact that it's situated on a river and there are these historic floods that happened, to the kind of town identity was derived from this car company. And in South Bend's case, it was Studebaker Automobiles, which existed for about 100 years and was this massive source of town identity, and not to mention revenue and economic prosperity. And then it kind of abruptly closed in the 60s. So in my book, I modeled the automobile company, which is called Zorn in the fictional world, on Studebaker. And I guess I also wanted to make it a fictional place because I wanted the freedom to pull from other cities that I think had suffered even more dramatically from this kind of, sorry, that's my cat. Like this post-industrial kind of disinvestment and neglect. And so I was also thinking about Flint, Michigan, and Gary, Indiana, and Youngstown, Ohio. And the one thing that it really doesn't share in common with my hometown, South Bend, is that in South Bend, the University of Notre Dame is there. And that has been a source of economic prosperity and employment for the town, and not to mention identity. And it was there when Studebaker closed to absorb some of the shock. So in Vacaville, there's no other economy to absorb any of the impact when the automobile company closes.
Yeah, and I think the story of you writing it, that it was only when you moved to New York for an MFA program, right, that your hometown started calling back to you. Can you describe that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So I lived in my hometown pretty much until I was 23. I spent a year studying in France, but that was, a study abroad program. And so I'd really never lived outside of my city in a permanent way until I moved to New York. And I could not set any of my writing in the post-industrial Midwest when I lived here. I've been writing pretty obsessively since I was young, and I would always set things in a different place, or a fictional place, or, a place I'd just been to a few times. But when I moved to New York, I started to think about the post-industrial Midwest in perhaps a more refreshed way. I saw it anew, and I got the kind of necessary distance from it, I think, to describe it more accurately, and also to draw from the affection that I had for the place, to see the beauty as well as all of the pain. And so I started to write, I just started to notice that all my writing was drawn there. And sometimes it was, you know, a dystopian sort of vision of this like monocrop Indiana. And then sometimes it was really invested in the post-industrial history of Indiana. But I was always really drawn to towns like mine. And so I decided I might as well do this intentionally and really take it on, you know, by looking it in the eyes.
Yeah, and I think your book opens with a quote from Michael Moore's documentary Roger and Me. It's like about rabbits. Can you talk about that moment in that documentary and how it resonated for you?
Yes, so I had written about, I don't know, 100 pages of this draft. And then I watched Roger and Me by Michael Moore, which is kind of his ode to his hometown, Flint, Michigan. And I noticed that there's this rabbits kept appearing in my novel, like even up until then, in the very early iterations of the draft. But there's a scene in this documentary that grabs my attention because Michael Moore sees a sign on the side of the road that says rabbits, pets or meat, something like that. And he goes to investigate and finds a woman who had lost her job and was now breeding rabbits for a living. And they were divided into rabbits that were being sold for pets and rabbits that were being sold for meat. And she points to some rabbits who are attacking each other. And she says, essentially, you have to kill them before they get to a certain age, or they'll start to like injure and maim each other. And I found that it was so disturbing and so striking, but also it seemed to be this kind of perfect encapsulation of what happens when there's an immense pressure on communities, when I guess the term that comes to mind is horizontal violence, when there's really anger directed at the cage, and the rabbits in this cage wanted to get out, but they couldn't kill the cage, so they're attacking each other instead. And to me, that just seemed to describe what happens in places where so many opportunities have been foreclosed before you're even born.
Yeah, and I think that there are two interesting strands. I've been thinking about this book a lot. I mean, it's really been resonating. And I think one of the males and females, I guess, to begin with, you know, readers who will be reading this book should know that the Catholic Church and female mystics is such a theme that runs through in Hildegard von Bingen. Can you talk a little bit about how these female mystics fascinated you as a writer and how it entered the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was many things. I think in some ways, including the Catholicism of the town was another effort at realism. Like the place where I grew up was incredibly religious, very, very Catholic, and that kind of infused so much of the town identity. And I think it's a very real part of many people's lives, and yet I rarely see religion kind of represented in contemporary fiction. And so that was my initial pull to the material. And then I thought, I was really, really drawn to the contrast that I think is generated between these kinds of like otherworldly, supernatural, almost kind of witchy, magical events, and then the very mundane sort of like steel and concrete and trash of this American town. My main character is she becomes really entranced by the female Catholic mystics, especially these medieval mystics, in the wake of a fairly traumatic personal event in her life. And I think she's also really drawn to them because they represent freedom. They represent this kind of path to freedom that doesn't require any resources, like other than time. And she can't see any way out of her town. She doesn't have the money. She doesn't have a college degree. She doesn't even have a high school degree, but she can imagine sort of retreating to her mind and her intellect to achieve some kind of ultimate peace or divine union. And so she becomes really obsessed with that kind of quest, not really from a religious perspective. She didn't really grow up religious, but from I guess she feels like a rabbit that's trapped in a cage, and she can't see a way out of it. So especially in the figure of Hildegard von Bingen, who is this 12th century German nun, she sees someone who is not only this kind of intellectual hero. She's she's obviously has enormous intellectual firepower. She wrote a language, she's sometimes considered the founder of natural history in Germany, and she wrote scientific texts and music. But she also had these, these ecstatic visions. And I think, yeah, she's kind of the heroine of my heroine.
And then at the same time you have boys, and I 3 boys who perpetrate some acts of violence, and I think that when people read the opening of the book, they'll know, yeah, it takes place within 1 week, and there basically a crime happens, and it's kind of unraveling the mystery of the crime, which makes it so incredibly fast moving and readable. And yet in reading about these 3 boys, I mean, young men from the juvenile system, they are from the foster kid system, they're humanized. I mean, they're not entirely villainous. And I wonder if, so males do bad things, but to a sense, they're also trapped. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I really love that reading of it. I mean, that was really important to me. I was really interested in the way that violence is socialized, especially among boys. It seems like the gendered management of power, it begins at a very young age. And I think that the boys in this book especially have not been given any other language or behavior, modes of expression to express any emotion, really. And the only kind of mode of action that they've been given to express any kind of strong emotion is dominance. And I think that they're all really suffering from that system just as much as they're inflicting that suffering on others. And, as alien as their behavior is, obviously it was hard to write it, but it was also, I was able to access it by tapping into things that I do recognize. And, one of those things is the way that you kind of become, you kind of join a hive mind when you really want the approval of those around you, and you don't know how to express that, and you don't know how to get it. For these boys, I think really I started to, the more I wrote their story, the more I thought of it as almost like a love story between them. Like they all really wanted each other's approval and affection. They'd never had brothers or really even close friends or family, but they couldn't express that. And so the devotion to Blondine, who, is the female character that they live with, I really think of that as sublimated devotion to each other that they don't have another way to express.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And I should note, and you yourself grew up with several brothers, like I believe 3 brothers. So I wonder if some of the humanity comes from, yes, some of observing them so closely, because it's like, and also that that your brother Nick, I believe, did illustrations in the book, and we won't say where they come or why they're important. And but it's stunning, and it really adds so much to this world.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that was a really fun collaboration because he's such a good friend of mine, and we've always kind of understood each other. So he knew exactly what I was looking for, and then he just augmented and enhanced all of it. So yeah, he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant surprise that comes when I hopped off the audiobook and went back to the book. So thank you. So congratulations, Tess. We're, and Samantha has been talking about your book for months and months, and then suddenly it's so that's been a really fun discovery and so deserved, and congratulations. And I know your next book is due in February, so we'll let you get back to writing it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me and for reading it with such generosity. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Oh my goodness, I have my holiday thing back on, and I just want to note before we go to Eric updating us on other book things that are happening, Tess reads the audiobook of her book. So if you're driving somewhere over the holiday, you can download The Rabbit Hutch, and that beautiful voice, and is reading this book with and it's quite exquisite. So
I cannot wait. That I love it so much.
Yeah, and it looks like Eric's dog may be appearing, so I'm very excited. So I'm gonna hop off.
Blooper roll about all of the animals that have come on the show over the last 2 years. Anyway, thank you, Ms. Lowe, as always.
All right, I will listen and look for the dog to compliment Tess Gunty's cat.
Please.
Happy holidays.
And I want to say thanks, Lauren and Ed and Tess, for joining us. And also thanks to our production manager, always the Oz behind the curtain, Julie Corlett. And also, folks, don't forget to pick up copies by tonight's authors at Once Upon a Time Bookstore. We're going to be back next month, but you don't have to wait that long for great content. Books editor Eric Peterson, as we promised, is going to tell us more about the coverage we've got coming up. Eric, speak to us.
Yes, I will do that. I think my dog is there. She's sleeping. Don't worry. She's not going to move. This weekend, we've got an interview that I did with Mick Herron, who wrote the book Slow Horses and all the other books. They're great. If you haven't read them, they're great audiobooks. If you like that, I like those. And the show on Apple TV Plus is just wonderful. So we've got that. And then maybe even better, I reached out to people about on Twitter, and I just said, hey, what are some recent books that you've loved, or the go-to books that you always think are great gifts? So if you are looking, we heard from an amazing array of people. A lot of authors just chimed in saying, hey, I always give people this book, or this book I read this year was the best. That's great. And then also Michael Schaub, who is a wonderful writer, he put together a list of if you have very specific people in your life who need books, he has what you need. So all of that's in the paper. It's also online, and check it out. And yeah, check out the newsletter. It comes out every week, and it's free, and it doesn't hurt. So thanks, everybody.
It's always a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Eric. I always learn a lot from that newsletter. And hey, you guys, if you want to share your thoughts from today, or if you have suggestions, or if you just have more questions, please email us at events@scng.com. Listen, I want to thank all of you for joining us here. And I want to thank a lot of you for showing up time after time and supporting us all year. Have a great holiday. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Bye.